Madam Speaker, thank you very much. I'm pleased to rise today to speak in favour of the motion which has been brought forward by the official opposition, which demands that this Liberal government answer a very simple question. It is a question that has been asked repeatedly by Canadians for the last 3 years now. The question is this: in what year will the budget be balanced? That's as simple as that. We call upon this Liberal government to finally be upfront with Canadians and tell us in this week's fall economic statement, in what year will the budget be balanced? This motion, I think, is reasonable, I think it's fair, and it's certainly straightforward. This Liberal government should have no trouble telling Canadians coast to coast to coast when will they balance the budget. The Liberals clearly had no trouble telling Canadians during the 2015 election that they would balance the budget by 2019. Just a year away, I should add, Madam Speaker. Why is it that as soon as we get into government, after piling on billions and billions of debt through reckless spending, they suddenly seem to struggle with the simple question: why is it that this Liberal government's most extensive track record is its ever-growing list of broken promises? When the Liberals fail to tell Canadians time and time again when the budget will be balanced, they are not only failing to be accountable to current generations of Canadians, they are failing to be accountable to future generations as well. The Liberal debt of today becomes higher taxes of tomorrow. These are the taxes that are heaped onto the shoulders of our children and our great-grandchildren. Yes. They did not ask to be overburdened with this Liberal debt. They did not ask to be the ones who will be stuck with this terrible task of paying for the deficits of today. Does this Liberal government have any plans at all to lessen the burden which it continues to create for these future generations? Has it at least committed to reduce the rate at which it adds to the federal debt? Unfortunately, for our children and our grandchildren, the answer is no. In fact, this Liberal government has just made the situation worse, Madam Speaker, by increasing its reckless spending with each passing year. The one thing that this Liberal government really excels at is its ability to keep digging itself into a hole which keeps getting deeper, deeper, and deeper. The unfortunate thing is that the current and future generations of Canadians will be the ones who will bear the consequences of the future and the failure. Yes. The irresponsibility of this Liberal government has significant costs for all Canadians. The size of the deficit in this year alone is nearly $20 billion, a figure which is 3 times larger than what the Liberals promised it would be. This Liberal government has added a remarkable $60 billion in debt. This is not what the Liberals promised to Canadians. Last year, this Liberal government spent alone $23 billion just servicing the national debt. $23 billion. This is not what the Liberals promised to Canadians. Interest on the national debt now is expected to grow by 2/3 to $37 billion a year, almost as much as we spend on the entire health care transfers to provinces and territories. This is not what the Liberals promised to Canadians. How can this Liberal government claims it stands for sunny ways, that it believes in supporting the middle class, and that it supports the development of economic opportunity for all Canadians, when it actively pursues a policy of fiscal mismanagement which will see more and more Canadian tax dollars going towards interest payments on the national debts, compared to the amount which is actually spent on health care transfers. Canadians expect that their hard-earned tax dollars will go towards funding programs and services that benefit all Canadians. Unfortunately, reckless Liberal spending will make sure that increasingly large portion of those tax dollars simply go into the pockets of bankers and bondholders now who own the interest on this ever-growing Liberal debt. Perhaps what is most shocking about the debt of this Liberal government, it was completely avoidable when we look back at 2015. The Liberals did not face dire economic situation when they came into government just 3 years ago. In fact, the Liberals inherited a great fortune, which any government would dream of. The Prime Minister inherited a balanced budget, which was left behind by our former Conservative government. He had the benefit of thriving U.S. and global economies, which had recovered from the worst of the 2008 recession. He could take advantage of a booming housing markets in Toronto and Vancouver. He had the benefit of record low interest rates, never ever seen before in our lifetime. But all of these added factors gave the Prime Minister, Madam Speaker, a windfall of $20 billion in additional revenue alone last year. And yet, somehow, despite all this great fortune, the Prime Minister still somehow managed to spend it all in a mere matter of months and leave all Canadians with almost absolutely nothing to show for it. Instead of sunny ways and real change, he has left Canadians with a growing mountain of billions of dollars of debt, which is not going to be erased for many years to come. Instead of a budget which balances itself like the Prime Minister actually promised in 2015, Finance Canada tells us that Canadians will now face at least 25 more years of deficit at the rate that this Liberal government engages in their reckless spending. Canadians are already facing the cost of higher interest on record household debt. Instead of helping to ease the burden of those Canadians face, this Liberal government is hurting Canadians by saddling them with the prospect of more massive tax increases just to fund the Prime Minister's reckless and inefficient spending habits. Yes. Canadians deserve a government that actually works for them, Madam Speaker, rather than against them. Sadly, this Liberal government only continues to disrespect hard-working taxpayers by making life more expensive for Canadians across this great country. Because the Prime Minister never had to worry about money, he does not think or even worry much about the money of Canadians when he carelessly spends it. We have seen that, Madam Speaker. He doesn't worry if he spends over $1.66 million on that failed trip to India, which only led to an international diplomatic debacle. He does not worry if he spends over $8 million just a year ago on a temporary ice hockey on the lawn of Parliament Hill. And he certainly does not worry when he pays $4.5 billion of taxpayers' money to Kinder Morgan as a result of his failure to get the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline built. Now, will the Liberals' newly purchased pipeline factor into this year's budget? We still don't know. $4.5 billion. What is their plan to sell the Trans Mountain pipeline? And the Liberals still have absolutely no meaningful plans whatsoever to get this pipeline even built. This past May, I spoke to the Liberal government's budget implementation bill, Madam Speaker, and I was asked the Liberal government at that time whether it was fair to members of the future generations of Canadians, like my granddaughter, Avery Thornhill, when we tell them that in 2018, that the government has no hope at all of balancing the budget. The Liberals have repeatedly failed to give Canadians an answer to this question, and that's why Conservatives today, Madam Speaker, are calling on this government to announce in its fall economic update 2 days from now, the year in which the budget will finally be balanced. Canadians deserve respect, and they deserve to know, Madam Speaker, when will this budget be balanced by this current government? Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for St. Catharines.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I've been hearing speeches from members of the opposition that pretend to stand up for the working class Canadians and those most vulnerable in our society. But I look down to the Conservatives' friends at Queen's Park, and we've seen the Honourable Leader of the Opposition there to take orders and staff the Premier on a number of occasions.
Wow.
But what we've seen in terms of their approach has been, first things first, cut education. Next thing, cut mental health spending. Most recently, cutting advocates for children, and most even recently, cutting funding for Francophone services and a Francophone university. So is this the path that the Conservative Party approves of? And is this what they plan to, their plan for the Canadian people in 2019?
I just want to remind some of the members on the opposition side that I am sure that their colleague will be able to answer the question. The honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is ironic. Kathleen Wynne built up the biggest deficit in the history of Ontario. Let's not forget what Premier Doug Ford was left with. Absolutely nothing. Reckless spending from the Ontario Liberals. You know what else, Madam Speaker, is disturbing? Those Liberal staffers from Queen Park in Toronto have moved now to Ottawa to help the federal government. We should all be very wary of the staffers that have left Ontario with the massive deficit that they've had. Now we're sitting in Gerald Butt's office strategizing, taking money out of every Canadian's pocket each and every day.
Questions and comments? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I was actually a little surprised when the Conservatives thought they would talk about deficits today. You know, for those that are following the debate, you really have to appreciate the Conservatives. You know, we've been around for 131 years. And out of that time, the Liberals have governed in the vast majority of it, Madam Speaker. Yet it's the Conservatives, with that minority of years, that have accrued the largest portion of Canada's deficit. If you take a look at Stephen Harper, Madam Speaker, he actually inherited multi-billions of dollars of surplus. And even before the recession began, Madam Speaker, he turned that multi-billion-dollar surplus into a multi-billion-dollar deficit. And, Madam Speaker, year after year, deficit, deficit, deficit. And they want us to take advice from the Conservatives who have been so abysmal. Madam Speaker, I'm wondering if my friend would recognize, and I would ask him, would he not recognize that when it comes to the deficit, the worst party in this House to go to would in fact be the Conservative Party, Madam Speaker.
Honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. The question is, when is this government going to balance the debt? When? We just want to know a date, Madam Speaker. Let me say this, Madam Speaker. When I was a young parent, growing up, we have 2 kids. Each Christmas, our kids got money in their piggy banks. But you know what? This Christmas, because of this Liberal government, parents are going to be given hammers. Why? Because piggy banks in this country are not safe under this Liberal government as they continue to have reckless spending.
We have time for a brief question. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands, a brief question.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. But, you know, let's just go back to the previous question because the member didn't actually answer it. Is he supportive of what the current provincial government in Ontario is doing with the massive cuts to very important social programs like protecting French as a second language in Ontario, towards the social services, towards education? Is he and the current Conservative Party, who by all measures the Leader of the Opposition appears to take his marching orders from Doug Ford, is he and the Conservative Party supportive of what's going on?
Honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Very quickly, Madam Speaker, I just would like to ask the honourable member if he would apologize on behalf of his father, because his father was part of the major deficit that province is incurring here today. So will that member stand up here in the House today and apologize on his father's behalf of putting Ontario residents in mass deficit that they probably will never get out of because of